I've been saying for about 2 years now that I'm begging Sony to give me a reason to buy a PlayStation VR 2. Now, between the recent $200 discount and the PCVR adapter releasing next week, I think they finally got me. It's a live open daily podcast. Let's talk about it. Welcome back to the pod. I'm your host, Live Open Mike. When the news first dropped of the price for PlayStation VR 2 of $550, I said right away as my knee-jerk reaction, that's too much. I didn't think about the fact that at that point, my only headset was the Quest 2. This is before I got my Pico 4 and the Rift S. So I was at a point where I had this perception that headsets should not cost as much as that. And the other blocker I had was the headset costs more than the actual console, the PlayStation 5 that you use to drive it. A base PlayStation 5 costs $500 and the PlayStation 5 Slim model costs $400. So I'm thinking to myself, there's no way I'm buying a peripheral that costs more than the engine I'm using to drive it. It would be like my PC costing less than my Quest 3. Didn't make any sense. Well, that seems to be changing right now, and frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if this became permanent. It was first announced that over in the UK, the price of PlayStation 2 was going to drop to $350. Almost immediately, I started seeing stuff on like subreddits and X of people saying, hey, at $350, I can't pass this up, and there are pictures of them with a PlayStation VR 2 box in their car. But that wasn't hitting the US, so I kind of dismissed it. Well, in the past week, that price now came down to the US, and you can get a PSVR 2 at Walmart for $350. Couple that with the fact that next week on August 7th, a $60 or $70 PCVR adapter for the PlayStation VR 2 will be released, allowing you to plug it in and play games on Steam VR. The PlayStation VR 2 app is currently live on Steam already ahead of this launch. Now I'll straight up admit that I was wrong here. When I first heard about PC compatibility for PSVR 2, I thought it was going to be software that had to be loaded on the PS5 and they weren't going to make an adapter because there's manufacturing costs and all that stuff associated with it, but Sony was still going to want you to have a PS5 to be able to use the headset. Got that completely wrong. They're releasing the adapter and now this software is available on Steam directly. So now if I want to get into the PSVR 2 ecosystem, albeit without the games library, it's only going to cost me roughly around $450 or so after tax. That is $250 less than what I paid for my Quest 3. That's a significant value proposition because now at that price, I have to consider what am I really gaining from this that I can't get with my Quest 3. And the main thing is going to be the OLED panels. Being able to get deep blacks when I'm playing like darker games or horror games is going to be a huge boon to that, even if I'm looking through small sweet spot Fresnel lenses. I do not own the PlayStation VR 2 right now, but I have played one multiple times. I played them at cons, and a friend of mine who lives a couple hours away from me actually has one down in his man cave. So a few months after release, I spent about 10 hours down in that man cave playing all of Horizon Call of the Mountain, Gran Turismo 7, and quite a bit of Resident Evil Village. After leaving that gaming session, I thought to myself, well, I've kind of had the full PSVR 2 experience at this point. I don't really need to buy one. And I've played Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil Village at gaming cons since then. But all that was predicated on the fact that I was going to have to buy a PlayStation 5, bare minimum $400, and then buy the headset itself, $550, so I was looking at spending $950 to do this. And now with this new discount, I can get in there for $450. I'm going to get an OLED headset with, it says foveated rendering. I need to be clear on what that is because some people are getting confused. This is the same foveated rendering that exists in the Quest ecosystem. It's fixed foveated rendering. It's not dynamic. So what it does is it takes like the center position of your headset and renders all that stuff within like a 30 to 40% or so radius at the sharpest resolution. But if you just keep your head perfectly still and then move your eyes, you can do this in the Quest 2, you'll actually see it pretty clearly. You'll see this stuff is not rendered at full resolution around the perimeter of your field of view. So anyone saying this is dynamic foveated rendering pretty much has their facts wrong. This is FFR, fixed foveated rendering. Most HTC headsets have it, Pico has it, Varo's last headset had it, the Pimax headsets without eye tracking also have it too. It's been a part of VR for a while, but the performance gains are not as big as you can get with fully eye track dynamic foveated rendering. And that's not going to be available on PC. But knowing that now I can split the purchase and still get value out of the headset without having a PS5 really makes it a hard offer to turn down. So I'm still sitting on the fence about it. I want to wait for reviews on this adapter, how well it works, how well the software works, if it's like glitchy or buggy or laggy or anything like that. I'm not going to be an early adopter on this, but if this adapter is viable, I think they got me. I'm probably going to buy one. But then the question becomes, why did Sony do this discount in the first place? A lot of people derided the PCVR compatibility as Sony just throwing in the towel on PSVR 2 and just punting on it, but that's a little short-sighted. If you remember all the way back to the original Oculus Quest 1, that did not have PCVR compatibility when it first launched. Moreover, it was not backwards compatible with old Oculus Go games. So the 50 or 60 games that launched with Quest 1 were the only games that were available for you to play. You could not plug it into your PC for PCVR. You could not play your old Oculus Go games that you already owned. It was just that library and that was it, similar to PlayStation VR 2. The difference was that Meta very quickly course corrected that and they made Oculus Go games compatible with Quest 1. And then about 6 months after the headset first first came out, that's when they introduced what we now know as PC Link, allowing you to actually plug your headset in and play PCVR. But for the first 6 months or so of Quest 1's release, you could literally just play the games in the library, and that was it. Now, Meta did move faster than Sony did, but in both cases, what these companies are doing is adding value. Up until recently, PSVR2 existed to pretty much solely play PSVR2 games. Yes, the cinematic mode does exist, and you can play your 2D flat games and watch stuff like Netflix, but the resolution on that is lower than what you would get on a 4K monitor or the 4K TV that's behind me right now. The resolution on PlayStation VR2 for both of those use cases is limited to this day to 1920 by 1080, very similar to how the resolution on like the Netflix app or the YouTube app were both super limited, which is why most people just use the browser for both of those on their Quest headsets. So by adding this adapter, Sony is doing two different things. Number one, they're cutting out the cost of the PlayStation 5. Which once you take the adapter into account, pretty much cuts the full cost for someone like me who's coming into it having to buy everything by almost 40%. And number two, you're opening up a whole games catalog that you could play on that headset. Now for people who have multiple headsets, you really need to look at what you're going to get from that in terms of like gameplay fidelity. Because you're getting an OLED panel and because the resolutions of my Quest 3 and my PlayStation VR2 are pretty comparable, you're basically trading pancake lenses, which are going to give you better clarity, but you're on LCD, so you're getting worse color levels, for the complete opposite on PlayStation VR2. You're getting better color levels, but you're not getting edge-to-edge clarity, and you're getting a much smaller sweet spot. Now, why the $200 discount? You'd think this comes closer to the holidays where they want to move a lot more units like Meta did last year when they discounted the Quest 2 to its now going price at $200, but I think this might actually be a business move. See, when PlayStation VR2 first came out, you could only order it through Sony's actual website. This was, I guess, the guard against scalpers and people who were going to like buy out the entire inventory and then jack up the price to $1,000. We saw that with the GPU crisis for PCs back in the pandemic. But the way general distribution works is that when you sign the deal with a distributor like Walmart or Amazon, what they're doing is they're buying a certain number of units right away, so they're giving Sony all that money up front and then they're storing that stuff in their warehouses. But most of these deals actually have refund policies, similar to how gamers can refund games on Quest and Steam if you play them less than 2 hours. So it might not be the full amount. Let's just say, let's use around numbers, that Walmart bought 1 million units of PlayStation VR2 and they're storing them in their distribution warehouses all over the country here in the States. Sony can now go back to their stockholders and their investors and say, hey, we closed a deal with Walmart. We've now shipped 1 million units just to them. We shipped another 500,000 or whatever to Amazon. By the way, those aren't real numbers. I'm just using flat numbers for the case of this podcast. But then fast forward a year and a half, which is about where we're at, and Walmart says, hey, I bought those 1 million units, but I've only shipped, let's say 400,000 of them. I'm going to exercise my return clause. So I'm going to ship back 100,000 or 200,000 units to you, and I want my money back. And now Sony's at the point where, because they got all that revenue up front in a different fiscal quarter, now they have to send all that money back to Walmart and take that L on this fiscal quarter. Good luck explaining that at your next investor's call. So this feels like a shrewd move to move as much inventory as possible. And for what I understand, it's actually working. I'm seeing a couple articles on Upload and Mixed News saying that retailers are saying they've sold more PSVR2 since this price drop in a day than they have all year. So let's just say you're a retailer, you sold 150,000 units of PlayStation VR2. I don't think that's an unreasonable number. If your sales increased over 2,350%, as these reports are putting out there, that means you sold over 3 million units in That means you sold over 3 million units in 24 hours. That's across the US and UK. That would be a massive win for Sony. It'd be interesting to see how many PlayStation 5s were also sold in that window, because that would be indicative of how many people bought the PSVR 2 expecting to use it for PC versus how many people bought the PlayStation 5 to play all the original games on the PSVR 2 existing catalog. I do expect sales to taper off pretty quickly, but if overall your sales are up that high, would not surprise me if PlayStation VR 2 ended up having a permanent discount to $350 and cut that $550 out entirely. Because if it's moving that well at that price range, then Sony can circle back and say, hey, for all the people who just got PSVR 2s, all however many million of you now, hey, take a look at Horizon Call of the Mountain, take a look at Resident Evil Village in VR, take a look at Resident Evil 4 in VR, here's Synapse, here's Switchback, here's Gran Turismo 7. By the way, you need the PlayStation 5 for this. So yeah, you can play Half-Life Alyx or like Into the Radius 2, I'm just using that as an example because it just came out, on Steam VR now with your PlayStation VR 2. But if you want to play all these amazing games that we personally funded, then you still need to go ahead and buy the PlayStation 5. Why don't you go ahead and do that? Ultimately, yes, Sony would like to use the PSVR2 to sell more PlayStation 5s, but giving the headset itself more value, more versatility, now you're putting it on a more even playing field with the Quest 3 to the point where I was pretty convinced I was never going to buy a PlayStation VR2 at any point unless I caught one like used on sale, like a pawn shop or something for a couple $100. Now I'm sitting here really strongly considering it to the point where I was looking at financing options. So in that respect, this discount is doing its job because you're getting a lot more interest from people who were kind of written it off when the price point was $550. You can catch Live Open daily on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and iHeart. Also check me out on Twitch. I stream VR there several days a week at twitch.tv/liveopenmic. Thanks, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.